DocTalk is brought to you by MERCK Animal Health, the science of healthier animals.
Hey folks, welcome to DocTalk. We're going to talk about tuberculosis today. We're going to talk about in cattle and in people. We have Dr. Sara McReynolds here. She is the Assistant Animal Health Commissioner for the state of Kansas. And she's one of my former students, but more importantly, in the last decade or so, she has developed into one of the world's leaders and veterinarians on tuberculosis.
As dependable as the sunrise, in dairy parlors, open pastures, on ranches and feed yards across America. A place where reputation is more than a name, where the science of healthier animals is a way of life. It's the responsibility that drives who we are and what we do. Every decision, every day. It's your livelihood and our responsibility.
If my calves start healthy and stay healthy, I've got a good shot at making money. That is why I trust Clostrix. It gives my calves the protection they need until their own immune systems kick in.
Calf raisers trust Clostrix colostrum supplements. Clostrix is USDA licensed and proven effective. When your money is on the line, trust Clostrix.
Valley Vet Supply is devoted to providing information and professional quality products at reasonable prices.
Valley Vet Supply.
Closed captioning brought to you by Vet Gun with Amel and new AMA Abamectin Vet Caps, the 1-2 punch against horn fly resistance from AgriLabs.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome to DocTalk. I'm Dr. Dan Thompson, and I am blessed to have a very special guest here with us today, Dr. Sara McReynolds. Dr. McReynolds is the Assistant Animal Health Commissioner here in the state of Kansas, and she is a K-Stater. And originally from Stockton, Kansas, and has been one of those people that when she was a veterinary student and then watching her as a veterinarian and then get into the field of public health and animal health, it has just been a joy, and she's made us all so proud. And so we're so thankful for you to be here.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be on the show.
So I keep picking topics, and Dr. McReynolds is a perfectionist, and finally I said, what about tuberculosis? I love tuberculosis. So here she is. Tell me a little bit just about tuberculosis and what it is and you know why it's a big deal. Well,
I really didn't know that as much about it until I got into the regulatory medicine field, and then we started learning about USDA was one of the initial program diseases in the early 1900s, and through pasteurization of milk and through testing, we were able to almost eradicate tuberculosis from the United States. But now we keep seeing herds pop up with new cases of tuberculosis, sporadic cases in different states. So it's something that we're still dealing with today. And then also as people are drinking raw milk again, we're also seeing some more human cases because that is certainly a way it can be spread.
So is, as far as the spread between cattle, is it something that's spread easily? Is it something that's...
It has to take direct contact. It is a long disease, so often cattle might have tuberculosis before we even know it, or they might be shedding that bacteria. So it does take direct contact, nose to nose, or it's in the lungs, so respiratory droplets can get in, or contaminated feed or water can spread it.
Okay. And so when as far as, I assume then the public health risk is if we would drink the milk, or what about meat?
There isn't as much meat public health risk. In the early 1900s, I know there was a lot of human cases of tuberculosis of people who might work in the packing house because there were so many lesions of tuberculosis in those cattle going through. And we don't see that today. When we find tuberculosis, it tends to be slaughter surveillance of those cows, but we're finding smaller lesions. So that risk for the humans is not as significant. It's certainly drinking raw milk if it happens to be in a herd that has tuberculosis.
And what are some of the, does it pop up like in hot spots, or is it consistently across different areas, or?
We're seeing it in some other countries is endemic for tuberculosis. So if you maybe go to another country and there are raw cheeses or milks, it can be pretty common. But in the United States, it's not. It's pretty sporadic locations, not common.
Cool. Well, it's so good to have you here. Thank you for watching DocTalk. We're here with Dr. Sara McReynolds. We're going to take a break, and when we come back from the commercial, we're going to talk a little bit more about TB. You're watching DocTalk, and we appreciate it. Hey folks, thanks for joining me on today's Cattle First Minute as sponsored by Boehringer Ingelheim Vet Medica. You know, when we start to think about breeding season and turning bulls out, the one thing I can't emphasize enough is to get a breeding soundness exam done on your bulls before turnout. And some of the things that can happen during the winter, whether it's frostbite in certain areas of the body, or there's things that can happen that will cause a bull to become infertile, are things that you need to make sure. The other thing that's very important on a breeding soundness exam is we have to make sure that we don't have lameness or issues with the feet, because no wheels, no calves. So making sure that we have a sound bull structurally, making sure that we have one that's fertile and one that can produce enough sperm and enough volume with enough motility with no defects in the sperm is vitally important to making sure every year before you turn out to ensure that you get a calf crop, at least from the bull's point of view.
When you're in the cattle business, no matter how much it's a business, it still starts with cattle. It's this basic notion that sits at the core of how we approach things at Boehringer Ingelheim. We understand when you put the cattle first, it just naturally leads to doing the right things. If you want to do well in this business, you start by doing right. Take care of the cattle, and they'll take care of you.
Valley Vet Supply is devoted to providing information and professional quality products at reasonable prices.
ValleyVet.com, ValleyVet.com, Valley Vet Supply.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome back to DocTalk. Dr. Dan Thompson here with Dr. Sara McReynolds. She's a veterinarian and she is the Assistant Animal Health Commissioner here in the state of Kansas. And we're very proud of her as a K-State alum, and we're tickled to have her on the show. And we're talking about tuberculosis, and as we were talking off break, it's some of this, when we talk about zoonotic diseases, we always think about diseases going from animals to humans. It's not always the case?
No, it's not. We are seeing more cases, unfortunately, in the United States where tuberculosis is going from humans to those animals. it takes direct contact, but it can certainly be spread both ways. The bovine tuberculosis can go to humans, but the human tuberculosis can also go back to cattle. So we have had a couple cases in the United States recently. A dairy in Wisconsin was able to determine through amazing whole genomic sequencing now, we can look at a bacteria and say, have we seen this bacteria before in a human or animal? And be able to pinpoint how diseases are spread. So we are seeing where human workers maybe are giving the disease to cattle too. So when we have someone that gets sick, especially some sort of chronic pneumonia or bronchitis type things, it's probably very important to get it checked out. Absolutely, and I know if I travel overseas, I often will come back and just get a tuberculosis skin test. And it's probably a good idea for all your workers on your dairy or at your feedlot or at your farm to just make sure you know their tuberculosis status before they start working with animals.
Yeah, it's a good point. And when we see things in the beef industry at the packing plant with TB, it's usually cattle of Mexican origin are beef animals that have the highest prevalence of TB, and so when we are bringing in immigrant workers and people from countries of unknown TB status or worse, known TB issues, it probably is important so that you don't have reactor animals and animals that show up on your farm.
Absolutely, and when we find a TB slaughter trace, we have to go back 5 years of tracing. So we find always a few every year in different states. So we have to go back and look at all those movement records for the past 5 years and all those cattle that animal was together, commingled with. We have to test those herds. So it's a lot on the producer, and that's why official identification is important, and we require the certificates of veterinary inspection. So if we would have to do a trace, we can go back 5 years and make sure there's not animals that maybe have tuberculosis out there. And
the 5 years is partly because animals can live with this disease, right?
Exactly, yeah. They can live for quite a while before you know. And a lot of the animals at slaughter, they don't realize they have the disease. They're not showing the signs of it yet. So we go back 5 years because they've certainly been able to spread it back when we look back at these animals.
So big undertaking if we find a positive.
It is, and in the state of Kansas, we're testing some herds that have just been exposed to other animals that have been confirmed with tuberculosis, and that's 5 years of testing as well for those animals.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about TB, testing, regulation, and different things with Dr. Sara McReynolds.
If my calves start healthy and stay healthy, I've got a good shot at making money. That is why I trust Clostrix. It gives my calves the protection they need until their own immune systems kick in.
Calf raisers trust Colostrix colostrum supplements. Colostrix is USDA licensed and proven effective. When your money is on the line, trust Colostrix.
No matter where, no matter why, the Veterinary Health Center at Kansas State University is committed to providing quality patient care to animals and exceptional customer service to their owners. From routine checkups to emergency and specialty care, our world-renowned specialists and experienced professionals are here to discover, to teach, and to heal.
Let us know.
How can I help?
How can we help?
Valley Vet Supply is devoted to providing information and professional quality products at reasonable prices.
ValleyVet.com, Valley Vet Supply.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome back to DocTalk. Dr. Dan Thompson here with our Assistant Animal Health Commissioner in Kansas, Dr. Sara McReynolds. And we're blessed to have her in Kansas and to have her here today. When we were talking about TB, so as a beef producer or dairy producer out there, what are some of the things that are kind of now becoming regulation or regulatory as far as movement of cattle and tuberculosis?
Well, and I kind of mentioned the risks with dairy cattle and milk and different workers. So what we do, almost every state requires a tuberculosis test before any dairy adult cattle can come into their state, at least for breeding purposes. So the private veterinarian comes out and they do a test, and then if they happen to have some type of response, then we go back and do a secondary test to make sure that they don't have any further response for tuberculosis. So a lot of private veterinarians are out there testing cattle before they can move between states to try to make sure they don't have tuberculosis. We also, on some of those higher risk animals, Mexican origin cattle, dairy cattle, we also require official identification on every time that cow or calf crosses state lines to make sure if we have to go back 5 years that we can actually trace those calves. Because if they have gone to slaughter already, then we don't have to keep tracing. So the sooner we can figure that out, the better.
So, you know, we had someone I was at different feedlots that I've worked with, you know, we'll get dairy calves in that were exposed or things of that nature. And when we feed those animals, or if we buy them, or feed them and they have those metal tags, if one of them dies, we have to report that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it changes how you have to keep track of things.
Right, and if those type of animals that are exposed at a feedlot, and we have that commonly for producers, we reach out to them and then we say, we need to know when those animals are going to be slaughtered. So we can also do enhanced slaughter surveillance. So if we have exposed group of calves, we maybe don't have to go out and test them. We just monitor until they go to slaughter and make sure we do enhanced surveillance on them.
Yeah, because I specifically remember one that died and the renderer came and grabbed the animal before I got the tag number, and that
gets all the government workers worked up, right?
It had not just government workers, it had all of us worked up because we want to do the right thing.
Right.
So what are some of the things that you're seeing now as a veterinarian and as an animal health commissioner that has you, you know, very confident about our ability, or what are some of the things maybe we're not confident about?
Well, the unfortunate thing is, I mean, I talked about tuberculosis was one of the original program diseases for USDA. We haven't had much advancement in diagnostic testing. So some of the struggle that we keep finding cases is we don't have very good tests. And those are tests that we do in the field with animals. They can be quick, but they just don't do a great job of knowing if it's truly a positive animal. So a big need is just better diagnostic tests. I think that would get us past the sporadic cases and get us closer to true eradication of the disease.
Cool. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, one of the things I wanted you to just kind of go through is just walk through what the normal testing would be. If veterinarians that come on my farm and test cattle for TB, just kind of walk us through the testing and the diagnostics of what we have, and then we'll do a wrap-up. Folks, we have Dr. Sara McReynolds here. We're talking about tuberculosis. Thanks for joining us.
Some call it a come-from-behind victory, an unlikely win, a reversal of fortune, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. This is our moment, our victory dance, because we choose confidence. We choose Zuprevo for BRD treatment. Ask your veterinarian to prescribe Zuprevo. Zuprevo is a fast-acting, long-lasting BRD treatment that you can count on to get the job done. Choose confidence. Choose Zuprevo from Merck Animal Health.
If my calves start healthy and stay healthy, I've got a good shot at making money. That is why I trust Clostrix. It gives my calves the protection they need until their own immune systems kick in.
Calf raisers trust Colostrix colostrum supplements. Colostrix is USDA licensed and proven effective. When your money is on the line, trust Colostrix.
Valley Vet Supply is devoted to providing information and professional quality products at reasonable prices.
ValleyVet.com, ValleyVet.com, Valley Vet Supply.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome back to Doc Talk. Dr. Dan Thompson here with Dr. Sara McReynolds. She's a veterinarian and she is the Assistant Animal Health Commissioner here in the state of Kansas. We're talking about tuberculosis. Now, walk us through how we test for TB.
Yeah, so if you've ever had a skin test yourself, that's right here. They just put a little bit of the antigen right underneath the skin and there's a bump. We do the same thing in cattle, but we use that caudal tail fold. So if you lift up the tail, there's a fold on each side, and we put that little bump right there. Just like in humans, the veterinarian injects it, makes sure you see a little bump, and then they come back 72 hours later to see if there's any type of response to that. So we're just seeing if the body has ever seen that tuberculosis antigen before, and if there's any type of response, then we call that a responder.
Okay, so like gets bigger or gets inflamed?
Any swelling, sometimes you'll lift up the tail and there'll be an obvious response. Sometimes you'll just feel that fold and there'll be a little bump or any swelling. So any type of response at all, small or big, we would call a responder.
So it's a two-trip deal for the vet.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mentioned the diagnostics aren't as good as we'd like. So we expect at least 3% of every animal is going to respond because there's different type of bacteria too that they're responding to. So then a regulatory veterinarian will come out and we do it on the neck. A cervical, and we'll actually try to narrow down from bovine and then an avian and try to narrow down does this happen to be tuberculosis or another bacteria. So our regulatory veterinarians are always out trying to rule out because you're always going to have about a 3% response to the caudal fold test.
Gotcha. Talk to then, how do I keep it off my farm, or what are some of the principles that producers could do to just, try to keep TB out?
Yeah, and if you have a dairy, we have had some dairies where it's really spread throughout the dairy because maybe their pasteurizer for their calf milk was down and they just started feeding that milk without pasteurizing it. And then once those calves ingest that milk, it certainly can spread. So if you have a dairy, it's certainly important to pasteurize the milk that you're feeding to your calves as well. As far as beef producers, higher risk would be fence line or having your cattle with rodeo stock, and that's a lot because they're Mexican origin calves or they've been with Mexican origin rodeo calves. And just like you said, they just have more tuberculosis there. So any type of rodeo stock commingling or Mexican origin animal would certainly be a high risk situation for tuberculosis. And then we have some producers that have found cases and they maybe have a closed herd only by their bulls. They don't do any high risk movement and we're still finding tuberculosis. So there's something there we haven't figured out yet on how it's being spread. And it certainly could be deer in Michigan. They have their deer, it's endemic for tuberculosis in their wild deer. So that's certainly a cause in Michigan.
Anybody that wants to invite me out, Dr. McReynolds is doing the eradication in cattle. I do deer eradication if you need help with your deer population.
Right.
But anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's fun.
It was great to have Dr. Sara McReynolds here today, and the state of Kansas is in good hands with her and her colleagues up on the Hill. Thanks for watching DocTalk. Remember, always work with your local veterinarian, and if you want to know what we do here at DocTalk, you can find us on the web at www.doctalktv.com. I'm Dr. Dan Thompson here with Dr. Sara McReynolds, and we'll see you down the road.
Closed captioning brought to you by Vet Gun with Amel and new AMA Apomectin Vet Caps, the 1-2 punch against hornfly resistance from AgriLabs.
For more information about this program or previous programs, go to DocTalkTV.com.
DocTalk was brought to you by MERCK Animal Health, the science of healthier animals.
As dependable as the sunrise, in dairy parlors, open pastures, on ranches and feed yards across America, a place where reputation is more than a name, where the science of healthier animals is a way of life. It's the responsibility that drives who we are and what we do. Every decision, every day. It's your livelihood and our responsibility.